Hi, this is Lorraine Watry, and this is the finish of the Winter Rivers and Trees video. The Class 6 video was going to be too long for me to include the finish of my painting. The students and I got quite a ways in the class itself, and I showed them lots of different techniques and parts of the painting, and then I wanted to get this video out there for everyone to see the final of my painting. And I am going back to work on the branches of the tree that are up in the upper left, and I'm using cobalt, burnt sienna, and some quin magenta, and creating a variety of anywhere from like a magenta to a gray-brown in those branches, so that there is some variety of color. And I am painting around the white areas that would be the masked areas. I have removed the mask, and the snow that is on those branches I now have to paint around. And then that way I can also adjust any edges, if there are any edges that are kind of rough or not the shape I want them. So I'm using clear water also here and there, and I will use that clear water to paint on the upper part of those branches, and then use the paint on the lower half, and I can then, that water will help me sort of make the branch look rounded and give it form. I'm using a darker color for any place that is going over a lighter area, like those kind of burgundy bushes that are in the background, and some lighter branches where the value behind it is darker. So there's a variety of values going on as well. And I also used a little bit of cerulean or cobalt with some quin rose to give some shadowing to the snow that was on those branches. And now I'm using a flat brush with a little bit of water to soften some of those edges in the background rocks and snow, so that it will make them look a little blurry, so that they will not come forward as much. I want those back edges to be a little blurrier and my foreground edges to be in focus. And so just a little bit of water and kind of moving that brush back and forth on the edges can soften them. And I am going back with a little bit of water on that bigger branch. And it's a little hard to use the water like I'm doing on smaller branches, but on the bigger branches, again, it can help give it some form when you put color next to that water that you placed on the upper half. And then as I finish up this branch, I'm going to speed this section up. So I continue to work on the branches and get them mostly complete. Every now and then I will go back to an area and adjust it if needed. I don't always finish an area completely before moving on. And sometimes it's good because it will help me see where I'm going with the painting, but I can always come back and make adjustments. So I'm almost done with this section and getting all of that taken care of. And some of those little branches are hard to kind of go back into. Sometimes I will soften some of those edges too, so that they sort of blur into the background a little bit more. Once you remove masking fluid, they can look a little maybe not the right shape or whatever, and so just kind of adjusting edges can blur them and make them not as important, so that they don't stick out as much. And now I'm going back into some of those background areas of the snow and adjusting some of the value on the shadows that are in the background. They weren't quite dark enough. And then I'm still seeing a couple branches here and there that I want to paint in. So it's usually about going back and forth between things for me and seeing where I need to adjust a value or adjust a shape. A little bit more value on that branch helps separate it from the background bush. And I'm lifting a little bit of some lighter branches in those burgundy pink bushes that are in the background with a flat brush and a little bit of water. And then a little shadow on some of those background tree or snow areas. I'm using still the cobalt and quin rose or cerulean and quin rose, and sometimes I'll even use one of the blues, the cobalt or the cerulean, just straight by itself as well. Whenever you see me with that flat brush, generally I'm either lifting or softening an edge with some water. I pulled out some of the ultramarine blue and some of the quin gold because I wanted to add some more color to those background evergreens. The smaller foreground evergreens I'm keeping on the yellower side of green, so a little more of the quin gold in the mix compared to the ultramarine blue. And some of that yellow that's in that tree also helps relate it to the yellow that is in, not yellow, but yellow-green, I guess, that's in the tree, helps relate it to the gold that I have in the water. And then also there is a little bit of that yellowy green peeking through in some places from the background when I initially painted that. Then I also got out some ultramarine blue to use with the burnt sienna to go back and add some rocks and also some shadowing under some of the edges of the snow. And I vary the rock colors here and there so that there's some interest. In that area, I'm adding some color to the water because I want to increase the value right there so that the snow on the rock in the foreground stands out a little more. And then I go back with some of the grays in the water in the frothy falls part of the water so that I can add to the value. And I did decide to add a little bit of some color in that rock on that edge that was under the water, so it doesn't really look like a rock, it just more looks like shadow area. Right in here I'm softening some edges again, and then I soften the edge on the snow that was on that rock and put a lot of color in there so it looked like it was shadowed. I decided also that this edge of the snow could use even more color so that it would make it look like it was in deeper shadow. And I've started to go around and look for some of the shadows on some of those snow edges as well. And then you can see I'm jumping around again, so I'm back to doing some of the rocks that are in the water. And I switch brushes every now and then because I can get really good points with these silver black velvet brushes, but I just know that sometimes I want a smaller brush to go into a smaller area, or sometimes I want a bigger brush to be able to hold more paint and water. And I am using the dryer here. And that way I can make sure I'm not putting my hand into any of the areas that were still damp as I go back to paint other sections. And I decided then to check and make sure I had removed all of the mask. There was a little bit of mask in some of those rocks still, and I had the painting to the point where I could remove the mask completely, and then I would be able to paint around those white areas if need be. And every now and then on a painting, I will go back and reapply mask to certain areas, so you don't have to pull it off all at once, or if you do and you need to mask a small area, you could go back and mask those areas so that you don't have to remember to paint around something that's small or delicate. Just softening some edges in the background so that I can make sure that they don't stand out too much back there. and then seeing where I need to adjust either the shadows or some of the areas of the water. And I'm using a flat brush to lift a little bit right in there so that I get some more highlights in the water. And also I had masked a few shapes in the water where it was kind of flowing and had a highlight, and I went and adjusted those edges once I had removed the mask so that they weren't really hard edged. I wanted them to be softer. And the brush that I'm using is a Royal brand brush, and it could be used for acrylics or watercolor, and I always use them to lift or adjust edges. I don't paint with these. And I believe that's a number 2 in size, that flat brush. And if you see me go back over an area where I had put some paint or some water, I'm always making sure that it's dry before I go back over it, just so that I'm not going to possibly cause an issue in that area. Softening and lifting also actually in that area, because there was part of the, it looked like snow, but it might have been some water that was dripping from that rock, or might have been an icy area. I used also cobalt and some burnt sienna for gray parts of the snow where it was a little icier, and the grayer look will give it an icier feel rather than something with blues or purple in it. And a little more shadow, I believe, on those snow areas. Adjusting some edges on that snow so that it's got some hard and soft edges. And that is an effective way to make a masked area look like it's part of the painting, because a lot of the time when you remove masking fluid, it will have hard edges everywhere, and sometimes those edges aren't really clean, or they don't look exactly like you want them to. So going back with a scrubber brush and softening some edges, even if you just soften parts of an edge, it will connect that masked area to your painting. So generally I don't leave a masked area once I've removed the mask completely the same. I usually do something with it. So I'm lifting a little bit of some highlights back in that area because I want to make sure that it feels like the water is flowing down over the rocks right in there. And you can see I continue to go back and make adjustments to things. On this area right up in there, there are actually some branches that are hanging over the rocks, and that mass of snow that I'm working on right now is attached to those branches. And so I'm softening some of the edges in that area, and then I will go back and add some color in there in a little bit and a couple branches. Continue to work on the snow, and I generally work on my paintings sort of from the top down. So, and it also in the landscape would be the foreground, the lower part of this painting. So for me, it just seems natural to work from the back of the painting toward the front of the painting, and in this case, the bottom. Using some cerulean straight on that area. I will also take my paintings as I'm doing other things. If I'm making dinner or doing something where I can look at it from across the room, I will carry my paintings around with me. I'm putting the trunks on those trees back in the back, and that's burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to make a dark brown. And then I'm going back to this area. And by carrying my paintings around, if you look away from them and then look back every now and then, sometimes you'll see things that you maybe didn't see when you were painting up close to it. So the first thing I'm doing for this area is getting shadow on the snow and looking for those grays and blues and purples that are in that snow so that I can give the snow form. And I do all of that and let it dry before I put the branches in. So I work from the light up to the darker branches. And some blow drying to make sure it's dry. And then I can go back to, I think I do the branches next. So that's ultramarine, yes, ultramarine and burnt sienna. And they're very small branches, so they may not be really apparent in the video, but just interesting enough to have in there. And then once I get those branches in there, it helps me see whether or not I have the value of the snow dark enough, and so I can go back in that area if I want to, I believe I do in a little while, and add some more value. And I'm using that same mix of ultramarine and burnt sienna, and then I also got out a little bit of my Quin magenta to put with that mix to put some of those branches on a bush that is in kind of the middle of the painting up there. And I used a script brush a few seconds ago to add some of the smaller branches onto those other branches. In that area right there, I'm using my flat brush to adjust some of the masked edges so that they are a little blurrier and not too cut out looking. So I have some snow that's on top of the rock that's in the lower left that I decide that it is laying kind of weird. I don't like the shape that I created. And at some point in the video, you'll see me go down there and adjust it so that it kind of flattens this or connects that snow piece together a little better. And I like the look of it better after I did that. I usually have music or some kind of video or a podcast or something playing while I am painting, because that often will help me get out of my left brain as I'm doing a painting, and it becomes a little more automatic. I don't overthink things as much that way, and it can be relaxing depending on what you're listening to. So I highly recommend finding music or something that you enjoy listening to, and just kind of going with what your instincts are telling you about your painting. I'm softening the lower edge of this falls area, and this was part of the image that I made up in the video, or not in the video, sorry, in the painting itself. I did not have this part on my image. Kind of filling in some of the small shapes that are right in that area. And I also saw some areas under the snow back in there that I hadn't put a darker shadow under, so I went back into those areas to fix that. And I decided also to add a little bit more layering on the evergreen that was in the back, just to give it a little more texture and form. And that layering can allow you to see some of the earlier shapes that you created, and because the pigment is transparent, you get some of that peeking through the later layers. And it needed just a touch more color in the snow right there. Using some more value. So this is going back into that branch area after it had sat for a while, and I looked at it off and on. I could just tell that I needed a little more shadow in that area to give it form. Over on this side in the water, I'm getting to the point where there's not much left to do, but I noticed that in the image there was the feeling that the water was flowing over those rocks, sort of in that area, and I hadn't really done anything with that, so I decided to lift some lighter areas over those darker rocks, and I just used my flat brush with a little water and created some shapes over the rocks that made it feel like the water was flowing in that area. I ended up having to put, or wanting to put, a little bit of color back in that area too, for some of the shadowing. So I'm just going back in and using a little bit of darker value in a couple places to pop a couple of those areas. And then this is where I decided to go back in and adjust that edge of that snow area on that rock. And there are times where I will get to a point, like in this painting, where I will think I'm done, and then maybe I look at it for I don't know, a couple hours or a week or two, and then all of a sudden I might see something that I want to adjust. But generally I get to a point where I feel like there's nothing else I can do, and that's usually when I know that I'm done. It's usually when I start trying to find things to paint that I am overdoing it, and that I need to basically put the brush down and walk away because it's done. So I am going to finish this up, and I hope you enjoyed seeing this sped up version for the completion of this painting. And I hope you will check my website for future classes, and thanks for liking and subscribing.